Dear listeners, kind of heartbreak that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It's when someone you love is still alive, but the person you knew feels gone. Yes, addiction, severe mental illness, failed rehab attempts. And you are told to wait until they are ready. But what if waiting is not compassionate? What if waiting is dangerous? So, dear listeners, today we are talking about when love needs structure and when intervention can actually be an act of care. Yeah. So, welcome back to another powerful episode of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, dear listeners, where we talk about mental health not as a trend, but as something families live through every day. I'm your host, Avik, and today I'm joined by a lovely guest. Please welcome Mark Astor. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and nice to talk to you and your audience, and thank you for having me as a guest. I'm really grateful.
Amazing. I'm really happy that we have you on this show, Mark. And dear listeners, before we get into the discussion, I'll quickly love to introduce you with Mark. So, Mark is the partner at Astor Shimovich Law, and he works at the intersection of law, addiction, and mental health, helping families navigate crisis when substance abuse, psychiatric instability, and failed recovery efforts leave them feeling powerless. And he's not here with a theory, he's here from the trenches. Yes. And today we are exploring a difficult but necessary conversation, which is when rehab fails, when therapy fails, when waiting feels like a death sentence, what can families actually do? That's a great to think about, right? So let's get into it. I'll not take much of your time. Welcome to the show again, Mark.
Yes, nice to meet you, and thank you for having me as a guest. I'm looking forward to sharing our mission with your audience. So I'm grateful.
Amazing. Amazing. So, Mark, you started your career inside the criminal justice system as a prosecutor. Yeah, and you saw like what happens when addiction and untreated mental illness collide with law enforcement. So, what was the moment that you realized that the system was not healing people, it was actually processing them? So, what do you say?
Yeah. So, as you correctly pointed out, I was a prosecutor right out of law school. In fact, I had interned with the state attorney's office here in Palm Beach County, Florida, in 1993, and they hired me a couple of months before I was due to graduate law school. So I went back full time from '94 to '99. Now, the mandate in Florida's criminal justice system, even today, is to punish first and rehabilitate second. So back in the 90s, one of the things that we didn't have then was what we call diversionary courts, which meant as long as you weren't charged with a serious crime, we could sort of move you out of the regular criminal courts and send you to drug court or mental health court or veterans court, right? And the idea was you'd go through treatment and eventually the charges would be dropped. But back in the 90s, when I was prosecutor, they didn't have those courts. And I started to notice pretty quickly that we were seeing the same faces over and over again. And these were people that had behavioral health issues. Well, if they kept coming back and we had nowhere to put them, eventually eventually we just locked them up for as long as we legally could. And, in my experience, people with behavioral health issues, substance use, health issues do not get better in jail or even a prison. They don't. You got to get them treatment. So,
Fact.
that was my first sort of real exposure to what was wrong with our criminal justice system.
I agree. I totally agree, and it's really powerful because so many families believe the one options are like hope, or I do not want to take that word, but it's handcuffs. So and neither feels like healing, definitely. So and Mark, like here, I'd love to ask you again on one more thing. Is like we say, like wait until they are ready. So that's a very common belief in recovery spaces that you cannot help someone until they want help. So from your experience, when is that true? Like when is it dangerously incomplete or what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of the time, the families will call us and they'll say, "Well, my loved one, my adult child, has not hit rock bottom yet." And we tell them it's not about them, your loved one, hitting rock bottom. It's about the family hitting rock bottom. And what I mean by that is, when has the family suffered enough that they're willing to make the commitment to save this person? Because when somebody has a behavioral health issue, it's as if their mind has been hijacked, right? It looks like them, sounds like them, walks like them, but they are not running the show. Their mind is somewhere else. Somebody took it away. And what's going on here is they're being run by their behavioral health issue. And their quote rock bottom might mean they're dead. So we can't wait for that to happen. It's up to the family to make the decision to save their loved one. And my question to families is, when have you had enough? When are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? And that's a pretty blunt question to ask a family, but we're dealing with life and death here. And so you can't sugarcoat this. You got to have an honest, open conversation. And, I mean, we do that. Now, of course, you got to come from a place of love and caring and empathy, but you have to be honest with people and say, are you ready to make this decision? Because if you don't, something tragic might happen. Now, even if something tragic doesn't happen, eventually the state will step in, and it's not limited to Florida. And the state
Yeah.
can step in two ways, either through the criminal justice system, because people with behavioral health issues make silly decisions and get themselves arrested, or through the mental health system. See, in Florida, we lock people up all the time who haven't even committed a crime, because we have a mental health system that authorizes the state to lock people up and basically take away their rights,
Mm,
at least initially, without even a hearing. No lawyer, no judge, none of that stuff.
painful. I mean, yeah. So, what do people misunderstood about how addiction and severe mental illness affect the decision-making capacity?
Um, I think it completely erodes the decision-making ability of somebody. Most of the time when we speak to the family and we'll say, "Have you asked your loved one about treatment?" And what they tell us, typically is treatment. They think there's nothing wrong with them. They think that everybody else in the family needs to go and see a therapist. Or what'll happen is there'll be sort of a negotiation between the family and their loved one, and they'll get them to go to treatment, but they'll never stay long enough. And what happens is you have this cycle. They go to treatment for a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. They come out and the problem starts all over again. And this just keeps going on and on and on and on. And then the family says, well, treatment doesn't work. Yeah, if you go to 10 different treatment centers and don't stay long enough, guess what? It doesn't work. That's not recovery. Recovery is a process, and it starts with getting somebody into the clinically appropriate setting,
Mm,
making sure they are med compliant, and keeping them there long enough so that you can finally start to fight back against their disease. Because if you don't do that, things will never change. I just spoke to a mom before I got on with you. And I said to her, listen, if nothing changes, nothing's going to change. And she has an adult daughter who's been sick for a long time. And I said to her,
mm,
if you keep delaying this, you're going to have the same result. I mean, nothing's going to change until something changes, right? Which is meaning until you make the commitment to get her into treatment and keep her there long enough in a clinically approved facility, this is just going to continue. It's going to get worse because, like any disease, that's what happens when it's untreated. It will get worse and it may eventually destroy her.
exactly. 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 So, yeah. And um, obviously this is not about the control, and it's all about impaired cognition. And a family stepping in is not kind of domination. It's responding to a brain that's not functioning clearly, and that says everything, I would say. Yeah. Yep.
It's love.
Yep.
It's love. When you step into safe home, it's because you love them, not because you want to control them.
Mm.
going to court, getting a court involved, getting the authority to make the decision to save them is love and compassion.
True. You sit across from families who have tried everything like rehab, therapy, boundaries, financial support, everything. So when all that fails, what's usually is missing? I mean, uh, is it the structure or the legal authority, continuity of care? What? I mean, what happens?
I mean, I think there's a lot of factors that go into this, but recovery is a journey. It's not a destination. You don't go to treatment for 30, 90 days and you're like, oh, I'm good to go. It doesn't work like that. I mean,
Mm,
the typical recovery journey is probably a year long. And what that looks like is 3 to 6 months of, some type of residential slash
mm,
partial hospitalization treatment, which is where somebody's basically living in a facility or in the residences that accompany the treatment facility. And then they have to work what's known as a continuum of care. What that looks like is they go to live in perhaps in what we call a recovery residence or sober home. They get a sponsor. They go to meetings. They take their medications. They continue with therapy. If you can, in our experience, if you can get them to 1 year, there's a great chance they'll maintain recovery. But it doesn't stop after 1 year. I've got friends who have been in recovery 5, 10, 20 years. They go to a meeting every single week. And so, it's like at some point it becomes like, brush your teeth. You just do it every day, right? You work on your recovery every single day. Now, when families call us and say, well, it doesn't work, I want to know what they mean by it. Like, what is the it that isn't working? Is it the treatment? Did they not stay long enough? Did they not go to a clinically appropriate facility? Did they not work the continuum of care after the fact? Right? The recovery residence, the sponsor, the meetings, all of that stuff. Did they not do any of that stuff? And so I think really when a family calls, it's about finding out, what decisions has the family made or not made? What's worked, what hasn't worked, and why? Because until you know the answer to those questions, you can't formulate a plan. And so it's not just, well, treatment doesn't work or, legal intervention doesn't work. I'm going to tell you, in my experience, and we've spoken to thousands of families over the years and filed hundreds of these of cases, treatment
mhm.
works if it's the correct facility and they take their medications if it's prescribed and they work the continuum of care and everybody in the family's on board and does their own work. So it works, but I don't have a magic wand. What I have is hope. If you work the program, great chance that this nightmare is over. If you don't, great chance the nightmare continues and gets worse.
Got it. Yeah. Hmm. So, okay. And like it's if you also talk about the involuntary treatment laws like the psychiatric holds or civil commitment frameworks, like for many families, the idea feels extreme. So,
Yep.
when does legal intervention become appropriate? So, what do you have to say?
Yeah, man, you're asking me some great questions. I love this stuff.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, I mean, people say to me, "Well, I don't want to force my loved one into treatment," and I
Mhm.
completely understand that, and I understand why it would feel uncomfortable. And what I tell them is, look, you're not forcing anything. You're just making the decision they can't make, which is the decision to save themselves, which is a very different way of framing things. Right? It's a very different way of looking at things, because one, when we talk about forcing somebody, it almost sounds like it comes from a place of anger. When we talk about saving somebody, we come from a place of love and compassion. And there's a real difference in that. And if you look at it that way, it changes the dynamics. But in terms of when should we do this, I think you try this when everything else has failed. I mean, we're typically sort of the last port of call. And it's possible, and look, if a family's not ready to go to court, and I know that's uncomfortable, nobody wants to go into court, nobody wants to be in front of a judge, and nobody wants to have to testify against their own family member. And so sometimes there might be a non-legal option, like an intervention, right? And an intervention is a great way to get somebody to go to treatment.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, while an intervention can get somebody into treatment, the legal component keeps them there. And I think that when it comes to when should we do this, when you've tried everything else and nothing
Mm.
else works, right? This is the last hope. And so, I mean, I always encourage people, listen, I'm happy to help a family that hasn't tried anything else if they're ready to do this. But a lot of the time, families need that sort of intermediary step. Let's try something else before we run to court, because it's an uncomfortable feeling, right? The unknown, which is going to court, you know, subconsciously our mind equates the unknown with danger, right? Which is why we're resistant to do it. The status quo, what we're used to, feels safe, even if that status quo is complete chaos and insanity.
Right.
It feels safe. So the idea that this could be all over, in other words, that everybody's lives could change for the better,
Mm.
when you look at it from 10,000 feet, you say, well, that's an easy decision to make. When you're in the middle of the chaos, it's not an easy decision to make. It's a very frightening decision to make. And,
Right.
as humans, we're hardwired to avoid anything that we might equate with danger. It's how, we've survived all these millions of years, right? It's trying to avoid danger. And
Mm.
so I think when everything else has been tried, that's the time to say, okay, this is the last resort. We need
Yeah.
help from the judge. We need help from the court so we can make the decision that our loved one just simply can't make.
Yeah. So how do you make sure, I mean, if we have to say to our listeners today who are listening right now, and they somehow feels the same, and uh or for the family members also who feels guilty, even uh kind of considering the legal intervention, who worries that they will be seen as controlling or careless. So what would you want them to hear today?
Yeah, I think that in the past, there's been a certain stigma attached to having a behavioral health issue, right? It's people were like, shh, don't tell anybody because, the neighbors will point fingers at us. I think, I think that, I think that stigma for the most part is not there anymore. I mean, I just put out an article I do, I post about a lot of different content online. I did two separate videos talking about two separate celebrities
Okay.
who got themselves in hot water because they had a behavioral health issue. And the point that I'm trying to make here is it, number one, I don't think it carries nearly the stigma that it used to.
Mhm.
And number two, behavioral health does not discriminate. It doesn't care if you're some big wig, super rich Hollywood celebrity. It doesn't care. And
Right.
so one of the reasons I like to share that content
Mhm.
is so families can understand that they are not alone and there's no
Right.
shame attached to this. There's no stigma attached to this. And that it takes a considerable level of bravery to step in and intervene on behalf of a loved one. And rather than feeling like, well, I'm going to be stigmatized, I think we're at the point now where somebody's going to say, good job. You did what was necessary to save your loved one before either they died or the state stepped in and took them away from you. And I think people are much more inclined to stand up and applaud a family than to stigmatize them. I think I think for the most part that has gone. And I think that has gone hand in hand with the realization that when somebody has a behavioral health issue, that it is a disease, no different from any other disease. It's just a disease of the brain. And
Mhm.
so we need to intervene and fight the disease. Right? If somebody had cancer and you didn't get them the help they needed, people will say, "Well, I can't understand it. Your kid, your adult child had cancer. You didn't help him."
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It's no different.
Mm. Gotcha. Lovely. So, dear listeners, I would love to summarize this. I'll just try my best. Um, Here's what stands out to me is like when addiction or severe mental illness hijacks the mind, love alone may not be enough, but love with structure can definitely save lives, right? So, Mark, for the families who want to understand their legal options and feel less alone into this, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so our main website is mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com. That's mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com. Or if they just Google me, just Google Mark Astor. I have, I don't know, over 800 videos on YouTube alone. I put a lot of content out there. I do almost 2 videos a day so that people can get the information, about the things that we talked about. So I'm all over the place. It would be very hard not to be able to find me, even in your neck of the woods, as we say. I think you'll be able to find me. So
That's really lovely. And so, what we'll do is, dear listeners, I'll put all these details and the links into the show notes for your easy reference. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need it. And mental health crises don't just affect the individuals, they affect the entire families. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting. So, with this hope, this is your host, Avik, and this is Healthy Man, Healthy Life. Take care of your mind and the people who love the most. So, thank you so much.